Hello, if you're watching this PowerPoint narration, my name is Sarah Rooney and I am a foster parent with the Shelter Inc. I also do a little bit of recruitment for them and education about the foster care program that we have. I'm going to take you through a little program review, but with the focus on our family services that are the foster care, the kinship care, and adoption. So we'll go through this together. If you feel you'd rather turn off my voice and just click through these and read them on your own, you're welcome to do it that way. There will be slides where I will just wait for you to go ahead and read it, and there will be no narration. As you look here, we're going to briefly go through our history and our mission statement and the several services that the shelter provides. Before going deeply into the foster care program, I'm going to take you through how kids actually come into care, because typically new foster families or people curious about foster care want to understand that process. And then we'll kind of end by probably letting you read them, some of the frequently asked questions and answers, and then touch briefly on adoption services, which we do provide, but to remember that foster care is not adoption. It's temporary care. Sometimes it leads to adoption, but adoption itself is its own program. Shelter Inc. now for 8 years. I currently have 2 foster children, one that I will be adopting soon, and the other one will probably move to another home to be with his other siblings that are also in care. We have, I really can't count the children we've had, but probably I'd say 10 to 15 kids over the course of 8 years, some short-term, some long-term, spending a lot of time actually taking care of teenage boys, which for a short time was our favorite specialty. So that's the little story about me. So as you're looking here, history and mission statement, the shelter's one of your local Lawrence, Kansas agencies, been around here since 1981. I think it just started with the emergency shelters for the boys. And then it got diversified and grew to meet the needs of our families and children. And of course, our mission would be to improve the lives of families and children in Douglas County. Services and program, I'll try to briefly go through the juvenile intake and case management services, as well as the residential and emergency shelter for youth, but those are also very important services, and they're fairly complicated, especially juvenile intake. So if you have more questions about that, please feel free to call our agency and talk to somebody to get more details about that. I'm going to spend more of the time in this PowerPoint taking you through our family services program, which is about training, licensing, and supporting our foster, kinship, adoptive, and resource families. So again, here in this graphic, you will see the 3 services that we provide divided out in a way that maybe you can read it and get a little bit more clarity on what that is. You can always go back to the slide or pause for a moment and take some time to read it. But basically, we do have juvenile services. It's their prevention and diversion. So therefore, juveniles who may have committed a pretty low-level crime, and what we're trying to do is find a way to help them avoid court. Same thing would be for truancy prevention, diversion, so that they don't either get taken away from their home or in trouble with the law. We help them avoid court. They provide specialized case management for juveniles and their families, as well as resource management when it comes to monies to help stabilize the family so that children will avoid DCF custody. And those referrals can come from the district attorney's office, law enforcement, or can be self-referred. Again, if you have questions about the juvenile prevention and diversion services, please call the agency. We also have 2 youth residential shelters. They're emergency shelters for children that are in custody or are in care. We have 2 of them. One is for boys and one is for girls. I think they house anywhere from about 12 to 15 kids, ages 10 and up. And then the one that I'm going to be talking about is the family services there at the bottom, foster and kinship care, as well as the training, licensing, and adoption services. And to note, when you look over at foster care, a lot of people think that there's just one kind of foster care, but the truth is there are short-term foster care placements, more long-term ones, and of course adoption being lifelong, but to understand that there's many ways for you to provide care and love to a child, and that doesn't always have to be for long periods of time. Again, the juvenile services, I'll let you just look at this for a little bit more clarity and go ahead and read some of those. It is a great service for, young people who've gotten in trouble with the law, maybe their first offense, and it's not very big, and we can help them avoid court. So do remember that this service is available. Centers, shelters. I think a lot of people know the Shelter Inc. for those residential shelters. They are not the homeless shelter. It is very different. It's for the young preteens and teens that are in custody. Services again, that we have the foster care program, we have adoption services, and then the foster care program is broken into 3 sections: short-term, long-term, and adoption. Before I go more deeply into the family services and foster care, I'm going to kind of try to take you through how kids come into care. It's a question a lot of people have, and if you look onto the side, you'll see what they call a Rube Goldberg. And sometimes it does feel like a very complicated process, but there are some fairly clear guidelines, and I'm going to try to take you through those. First one, a report of child abuse or neglect is made, and that goes through the Kansas Department of Children and Families, known as DCF. And then when that report is made, they will send CPS, which is the Child Protective Services section of DCF, to go and get involved and look into it, and they will assess it, investigate it, and if they think law enforcement needs to be included, they'll do that, and they'll determine at that time whether they believe this child is unsafe and that they're recommending the child be removed from the home. The court actually is ultimately responsible for the decision to remove the child from the home. DCF or CPS do not make that final decision. It depends on the situation. The child will be deemed either what they call SINC, or child in need of care, and those are children that are removed from the home due to abuse or neglect and are in state custody. This child will then be placed in a foster home or a kinship placement or residential placement. That's when the abuse and neglect is substantiated and the child is removed. There are times where police are involved in an incident that isn't necessarily a report on child abuse and neglect, but it's a serious enough police involvement that they remove the child for a 72-hour period while they're investigating the home situation. And those kids are deemed a PPC, which means Police Protective Custody. And during that 72-hour period, law enforcement will investigate allegations. And that child will be placed in a licensed foster home or a licensed relative placement, but they may, after 72 hours, return home, or if warranted, they may also be placed into care. So children that are then referred for placement for foster care, for case management and placement, they go to one of 2 main contracting agencies most people have heard of. There's KVC, which serves Kansas City Metro and Eastern Kansas, and there is St. Francis, and they serve the children in Western and families in Western Kansas. In 1996, Kansas became the first state to privatize its child welfare system, and so what they did is agencies put in bids, and DCF chose which 2 agencies they wanted to contract with to provide the care for children in state custody. And in this case, KVC and St. Francis were the primary contacts through this contracts through the state of Kansas. And I'll explain that a little bit further. When those contracts were given, that gives KVC and St. Francis full case management authority. When children come into care and it's decided that they need to be placed in a foster home or kinship home, they first go through KVC or St. Francis, depending on where they are. KVC and St. Francis are also responsible for the case planning of the children, also the case management for the child's biological family, as well as they have their own foster parent recruitment and training and management of kinship families. And here's where the shelter comes in. So the children come in through KVC or St. Francis, and sometimes, more often than not, those two agencies do not have enough foster homes to serve all the children that are in need of homes. So they will start looking at smaller agencies for placement. And one of those agencies is the Shelter Inc. And those children then will be placed with those licensed foster homes. The difference being that the Shelter Inc. only license, trains, and case manages the foster family. They are not responsible for the case management of the child or the biological family. It's a much smaller entity, and their focus is just on training and supporting their foster families. As a shelter foster parent, and having also, been involved with KVC and St. Francis in the sense that I am the foster parent for those children when they come through my home. I do have the sense that the shelter's focus is on me and my family and getting to know who I am, and taking time to know what's a good fit for me and telling me when a child isn't a good fit and what would work better. So I really feel like they get to know my family better, and they get to know how I might better serve kids and what kids will do best in my home. One of the things I really like about the shelter that's different from working with the larger agencies is that one-on-one attention. They're really going to take their time to to know you and your family. It's a very thoughtful, mutual screening process, asking you about your strengths or things that children and situations you might find challenging. I found that there's very low case management turnover. I think I've had the same case manager for about 5 years, which is extraordinary in this line of work. Of course, then when you have that continuity, you have excellent communication, trustworthy guidance and support, and that case manager will have a much deeper understanding of your family and help you navigate either a child's needs or a new placement. They do not use guilt or pressure. They'll make requests of you, but if you decline a request or it's not right for your family, it's not like they stop calling or try to pressure you into taking that child anyway. They're very thoughtful about that. In my opinion, there's sort of less of a conflict of interest because it's not the child placing agency. This is an outside agency, so they're kind of a buffer. They go to bat for you. They may not be able to resolve and solve all problems, but they're in your court. And there's just sort of less of a conflict of interest. They'll be able to know if a child's right for your family. They'll be able to ask questions on your behalf, and they'll be able to figure out maybe whether this child is a good fit for your family before they even call you. And then, of course, it's smaller, it's local, it's nonprofit, it's a Lawrence-based agency, and if you're like me, I enjoy supporting my local nonprofit agencies. Into family services, foster care, and resource. They're now called resource families, but I'm going to use the term foster care a lot as that's something people are pretty familiar with. We have short-term care, and I'll take you through that. There's crisis care and respite care, and then the long-term care when most people think of it as foster care, and there's also something called kinship care, which I will explain. And then briefly we'll just touch on adoption services. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that today. Our foster care programs, letting you know that there are many ways you can be a resource to our kids in care. It doesn't always require a long-term commitment. The short-term ones being crisis and respite, and then the long-term being foster and kinship. You can take a little bit of time to look at this. So if you remember back, we were talking about how kids came into care. Some of the kids came into care because of police involvement, and they were placed as a PPC, or in police protective custody. So there are resource families, foster families, that provide crisis care. So you're committing to caring for that child from about 1 to 5 days during that 72-hour period where the court is deciding whether they will return home or be placed in protective custody. If they are placed in protective custody, you can either choose to keep the child if you're a viable placement and they cannot find a relative placement for that child, or you can go ahead and allow that child to be with another foster family. Their first choice, of course, will always be relative placement, kinship placement. That will be their first resource, and then they'll fall back on foster families if they cannot find a relative resource. Foster family, resource family, if that's what you would prefer. There's also respite care resource family. It's a great way to sort of get started, get your toes, get your feet wet on the whole foster care thing, because I know it can seem really overwhelming. I would certainly never ask you to just dive right off the high dive at the deep end of the pool if you weren't comfortable with it. So respite care, what that is it gives foster families, kinship families even, and children who are in care the chance to have short, regular periods of time apart, so they can rest, recharge, get a break. It also might be somebody has a funeral to go to, or some other some vacation or something that they planned well in advance of this child coming into their home, and they need someone to provide the care for that child while they are gone. These respites, it really is sort of negotiable. I mean, it could be anywhere from 1 to 10 days. I suppose it could be longer, but that's typically what that is. And the child comes into your home, you provide the love and care of a family, and then that child is returned to their formal foster home or their kinship home. And the beautiful thing about a respite family is that if you've really connected with that child and you really enjoy them coming, you could be a regular respite for the same child, and that can be just as powerful as being a foster family for that child, because I think the more people there are to love and protect and support a child, the better. And that's a good way also for you to get a kind of feel for different kinds of kids and what works well for your home. So you can choose to just provide respites, and then once you get comfortable and maybe start accepting longer term foster placements, and it is always possible that a foster placement doesn't work for a child you've served respite for, and you can say that you would like to then be their foster family. Long-term foster care, this is what people typically think of. So these are our foster care resource families. So we're taking care of kids that have come into care and their need is to have a safe and loving home, in the hopes that they'll be returned or reintegrated into their family. That can take some time. Placements then can last just a few days to more than a year. My experience has been most kids stay, I don't know, maybe 12 months. Everybody has different experiences, but they can be fairly long stays in your home. So that is something to think about, but there's such potential for a wonderful relationship. And if you're willing also to reach out to the biological family, if they're a safe family to reach out to, and you have some resources there, you can, with the guidance of the case manager, perhaps keep some contact and be helpful in that regard, especially if that child returns to their biological family. If you want to maintain contact, I would encourage you to do so within the bounds of the relationship. Care, I mean, basically that's care from relatives, and the state will, well, KVC and St. Francis will always look to relatives as placements first, but we often call that also kinship care. And you can just, with a basic background check and a quick sort of home study, as long as your background check comes out good, and let's say you're the aunt of a child that's been taken into custody and you want to be their relative placement, you can do that. But if you go ahead and get fully licensed, then you can be a kinship foster care family. So you can take care of that child, but you'll also receive support, as well as a stipend once a month that can help with care costs. And, it's our hope maybe once that child does go back home that you might consider fostering beyond your family ties. Requirements. I'm going to let you read most of these when I flip through them. It does take a while, but it's not really all that overwhelming. You just do it, one bit at a time. Basic requirements and regulations, I'll go ahead and let you kind of just read through that on your own. Now we're going to touch a little bit on the training requirements. As mentioned before, the training's about 30 to 35 hours, sort of depending on how long the home study takes and whether you have to make any changes to meet state standards. But what the training is typically called is called TIPS MAP. And that's a full acronym. I'm not going to go into it, but they'll take you through what all of that means. Basically, it's typically a series of 10 group trainings for about 3 hours once a week, probably in the evening, but I'm sure those times change. It could be on the weekday or the weekend. You will attend that training with other interested foster parents. Some of them may be through the shelter. They also might be through other foster agencies like KVC. Those TIPS MAP classes usually take place in Topeka or maybe in Overland Park. So there is typically a drive involved. It's very straightforward training. They've been doing this for a long time. It will make sense what any kind of homework or anything that's involved, and they'll kind of nurse you through that. If for some reason you are committed to being a foster parent, but you are not able to make that drive weekly into, let's say, Overland Park or Topeka, the shelter will work with you to do a private training called Deciding Together, using some easy to read workbooks with a series of topics that we work through with you one-on-one, or sometimes maybe with another foster family or interested family that also needs to do the deciding together. We would like to recommend that you do the MAP course instead, but if that is too difficult for you, like I said, we will work with you to provide the Deciding Together training here in Lawrence, Kansas, one-on-one. And again, first aid, medication administration, training, and your universal precautions, those are all pretty typical for training. Home study and the licensing. So it says, how long do you think it's going to take for me to complete? Now that, it changes 30 hours, 35 hours. It all just sort of depends on how long everything takes and if there's something you need to fix in your home. So, it's a sort of a little bit of a open area of timeline, but typically it can be accomplished within 3 to 6 months. And I'm going to let you read here about the home study and inspection and what to expect. I didn't find it that bad. There were things that I need to fix and to add, and it can be kind of frustrating sometimes to be like, well, gosh, I got to fix that and make that adjustment. And but they'll give you time for that, and they'll advise you on how to do that. So go ahead and read some of those inspection requirements. And please know, through this entire training process, you're never left alone. You can ask questions. People will guide you, next steps, what's going to happen, paperwork. It's lengthy, but you don't feel unsupported throughout the whole thing. Here's some questions and answers about the children, the kind of support you might get, and in terms of also medical and financial needs. Here's some numbers. You're welcome to read them, but there are well over 6,000 kids right now in state custody. And in Douglas County, that's 161 children, and they don't always all get placed in Douglas County. We would like to have more foster families here so that the children can stay in the place that they know and they are familiar with. It's traumatizing enough to be pulled from your family, but then taken to a whole different culture, a whole different town in Kansas must be really difficult on them. And then children come from all backgrounds, all ages, birth to 17, all cultural, ethnic, socioeconomic groups. And you can read there's stress factors, substance abuse, incarceration, poverty. There's a lot of intersecting elements for children that come into care. Kind of depends on how long it's going to take. I mean, if we find a good match, we'll give you a call. If it's not a good match for you or you're not ready, you just decline that placement and then we call again. The fewer restrictions you have, the sooner a child will become available, and those restrictions will be decided during the deciding together. So you will get to say, listen, I'm interested in children this age to this age, or I'm interested in serving teens, or I am comfortable with disabilities, or I'm not comfortable with disabilities. So we really take the time to figure out what you feel your strengths and weaknesses are, and what you would feel most comfortable with. And you do not have to take any child we call on or we ask you to place. No, you get a call, you get to ask questions, and if you do say no, it's not going to affect our willingness to call you again. We're going to respect that you're going to do what's right for your family. And again, I want to say that the shelter does think about good fits for families, and they don't typically call you if they're pretty sure that that is not going to be a right fit for you. Pressure or guilt, I've talked about that. I do not feel pressured or guilt to accept placements, and I know, having spoken with other foster families through the shelter, that they don't feel the same. They feel the same way as I do. As we discussed earlier, the child's going to stay in your own home as long as it takes to reintegrate them into a safe and stable environment. Through KVC or St. Francis, there will be requirements of that foster parent to show that they are doing better. They have to prove that they've had a job for a certain amount of time, safe housing, reliable income, mental health services, if that's required, anger management. They have a checklist of things that they are required to follow through on before reintegration can happen. So that does often take a fair amount of time. But typically, like I said, it does progress. And if a family can't progress or can't prove that they're viable for reintegration, then other choices will have to be made. But in general, anywhere from 5 days to over a year. If you're overwhelmed or you think you can't handle your placement, we understand. We will try to work with you. We recognize it's hard. We try to avoid disruptions. They call them disruptions in the home, where a child is removed and has to be removed to be placed in a new home. But if it really is unworkable, we're going to work with you, and we'll move the child to another home. You get a chance to have a notice of 90 to 30 days prior to ending a placement. So we'll walk you through that if that's what happens. And children do become available for adoption, but I want to advise you not to get into foster care to adopt, because some of these children will be returned home and are reintegrated with their families. And that's a cause for joy and happiness. And while you may have become attached to them, if you've formed a pretty good relationship with the biological family, and you've behaved in a way that has them trusting you, you may be able to continue that important relationship with that child after reintegration. But yes, they do become available for adoption for various reasons. Really all the foster care programs, KVC, St. Francis, the shelter, we are required to provide monthly visits, guidance, education, and on-call crisis services. That's across the board. What I have to say about the shelter is it is the one-on-one attention that you probably won't get from those larger agencies, and you will get to know your case manager, and she or he will get to know you. I believe it takes a lot of care. They take a lot of care in making their child placements and finding those right fits. So that's why I'm here speaking on behalf of the shelter. Financial needs. They do, if kids are in custody, they receive a medical card through the state of Kansas, so they're covered. You do have to use Medicaid providers, but I have found that's not been a problem. I've had some wonderful doctors using the Douglas County Dental Clinic. I found the card very easy to use and has provided all the medical care, at least the children that have been in my care needed. And then financial needs are covered. Licensed foster, kinship, and resource families do receive a monthly stipend to assist with the normal costs of caring for a child. It's not a job salary. It's not going to pay your bills, but it will help you pay for those basic needs of raising a child. And depending on their needs, the daily reimbursement rate is $18 to $35. It could run higher if you have very high needs children, but usually it's kind of within that range daily. And you get paid then once a month for your care of a child. And reminding you, if you are interested in adoption, there are more than 5,000 Kansas children in foster care, with under 900 needing adoption. Most of those kids waiting are from sibling groups, and some have older age children. And if you're interested in looking into that or have more questions about adoption, please feel free to ask us about that. This is just a little bit more information. Services that basically we just work with you and help match you to the resources for your family and the children and talk you through that. With the dry stuff there, training will help you through it. If you are interested in learning more, you want to ask about when trainings are, what kind of information they're going to be covering, that this is the time for you to start like reaching out a little bit further beyond this orientation video. And what I would suggest is that you just call the shelter. The number's listed there. I would suggest you ask for Joyce DeBolt, who is the director of the family services down there. Or if you want to email her, making sure you let her know that it's about fostering, so she knows to get back with you quickly. If for some reason she's not there, or perhaps by the time you've decided you want to look into it, she's moved on to another job, it's possible you will still just call the shelter and ask to speak with someone about being a foster parent or someone in family services. And I'm sure that the director then, or perhaps one of the social workers, would be happy to talk with you further. I encourage you to research, look into it, ask questions. This is not something you just you decide to do out of the blue. You do need to think about it and take some time to reflect. But I hope you at least go ahead and challenge yourself to get engaged in some of these trainings, and go ahead and ask those questions, and those scary questions, those things you worry about. It's okay. I have had such wonderful experiences as a foster parent, and I've been blessed to be a part of these kids' lives and having them enrich mine as well. I'm not saying there are never challenges or difficulties, but for me and my family, it's been an experience of great fulfillment. And from my family to yours, I hope that you decide to reach out and help some of our kids in care. Thank you.